Hi, this will be what I hope is a fairly short video about assembling a final animation using After Effects and Premiere Pro. So there are other ways to do this, other products if you're using Final Cut Pro or something, but I'm going to talk about this Adobe workflow just because that's what I use. So the first question we have to ask is when you are exporting your shots from your 3D application, so your image sequences that you then composite somewhere. I'm using After Effects. So then for each one of your shots that you export from Maya, for example, your image sequences, do you build all of your shots for your whole animation in one After Effects file with separate compositions, or one shot per file? So I think probably something closer to one shot per file is what you want to do. If you have all your shots, and I have done this in the past, and I kind of learned this the hard way, if you have all your shots in a single After Effects file as separate compositions, you can get poor performance because you have to load all of these EXRs that can be big files, and you have all these nested compositions, and it's take forever to load. It can, and you might run out of memory. And too vulnerable too. If something happens, that file goes corrupt, then you're losing a lot. Now, hopefully, you're saving in increments or saving versions as you go along, so that might be okay. But I just think that's not the way to go. So single shot per After Effects file. So each After Effects project is a single shot. It's way easier to organize, better performance. It's less vulnerable. If one of them goes corrupt, that's one shot, but you're still saving in versions anyway. Now there are some downsides too, because sometimes you want to use After Effects to make your transitions between shots by using, the shots themselves are integrated in a way that isn't just something you would do in Premiere Pro, like with the built-in transitions. So in some cases, you might want a single After Effects project to have more than one shot. So like I say here, shots with complex transitions or shared elements and so on. So, this is not a rule that you have to live by, but I think getting closer to a single shot per After Effects project is a better way to go. And I've done both, partly out of ignorance and partly out of just, like most of us, we just make projects work somehow as you're learning. So then the next thing that I typically do is assemble these completed shots in Premiere Pro. I've also assembled them in the past in After Effects by, exporting each shot out from After Effects and then bringing it back into another After Effects file to bring them all together. And I still do that sometimes because of some of the plugins I've purchased for After Effects that I like to use for transitions and things like that. So that is a way to go. But bringing them all together into Premiere Pro, which is a video editor, has some benefits because Premiere Pro is set up so it will do faster playback. You don't have to cache them in the same way that you do in After Effects, so you'll get more immediate feedback essentially in Premiere Pro. Okay, so then let's say we're going to do that. Premiere Pro is a way to assemble all our shots. How do we get the shots in? So there are two main ways to do it, I would say. One, I'll look at the second one first. Export each shot as a video clip. So let's say you finish shot one in After Effects and you just export a movie file, somehow an AVI or a .mov or whatever. And then you just bring that into Premiere. So one downside with this is that if you then want to go back and make a change to that shot in After Effects, you have to re-export it. It's not a big deal, but it's just, an extra step in the workflow. It is reliable, though. What you see is what you get. But this more work thing, so re-exporting with changes. And I say less interactive here because that's compared to the other way that you can do it. You can set up an Adobe Dynamic Live Link where you can actually import an existing composition from After Effects into Premiere Pro. And so we'll treat it like a movie clip, but that After Effects file still exists, so you can go back into it and make changes to it on the fly. And Premiere Pro is pretty good at rendering those things, so you get pretty good feedback. But it's a little buggy, and if you've got a very complex scene in After Effects with lots of visual effects, it can be pretty slow to play back. So I've got a few examples that I'll show you. but it is buggy, and it's hard for me to detail how it's buggy, because I run into problems sometimes. Even recording this video, I've run into a couple of problems, and I'll try and show them. And things with links, well, both of these are linked, but this is a more complex link when you have the Adobe Dynamic Live Link. It's a little less reliable. If you move from computer to computer or something, your pathways may change. Who knows? But really, ultimately, you probably want to use both, right? So there might be some shots or text effects that you might want to use with the Adobe Dynamic Live Link. And then some shots are just going to be easier to export as video clips. Now, I know there are some other workflows with a render and replace sort of thing in After Effects and Premiere. I've not used that, so I'm not going to talk about it, but it might be something to look up. All right, enough jibber jabber. Let's go into Adobe After Effects. Let me just pop over there. Okay, so I've got a few different types of scenes. So let's take a look. So I've got one that is just a text animation. So just something like this. So sometimes After Effects gives you some tools for doing text animations that are, I'm not sure why it's playing at such low resolution, that are easier to do in After Effects, and just you want to bring them into Premiere rather than trying to do your titles in Premiere. So here's an example of that. I'm using Mr. Horse Animation Composer for this. Let me open up a new scene. I'm just going to open a project here. So here we have an example, just ignore this top one, where I've got two shots from my animation. Title, sequence 1, shot 2, sequence 2, shot 1. What I've noticed, normally I would name these things in a very similar way. Like, so this one would be sequence 1, shot 2, and this one up here, it's a different title, but would be sequence 1, shot 1. And here's one of the buggy things. I found that Premiere sometimes has trouble differentiating between these small changes in titles, so you might actually have to have very different titles to help avoid that. But anyway, let's take a look. So if I'm in the wrong spot here. I'm just going to go, just make sure I'm going the right pathway. Yeah, that's correct. One other thing I've noticed sometimes with the live link between After Effects and Premiere, titles like this, so this is a OneDrive account that I'm using, and they've got things like spaces and dash, and this is not something I control. You can see it's part of the University of Toronto setup, and sometimes Adobe can't figure out this space dash space thing, which is a huge pain. Anyway, so let's just open this one and see what it looks like. Right, so here's a more complex animation, so I will just play this. I just have to load it into memory. So you can see this one is pretty intensive. It's, 6-second animation, so 6-second shot. And in After Effects, it's got to load into memory. But you can also see that there are a lot of different things going on. I've got pre-composition, so nested compositions. I've got different visual effects. I'm using Frischluft here, the lens care, so a third-party plugin, and so on. And so I've got depth of field, I've got exposure, I've got a nested composition that's doing sort of fake chromatic aberration, and so on. So you can see this is a much more complex shot. I'm just going to stop it. We don't need to see that. And then I'm going to open up one more. And here's a very simple animation, just a shape layer that's bouncing. And this is using a third party. This is using Motion 3's, I forget what the effect is called, jump, just to add this secondary motion here. And there is sound here too. I'm not sure if it's playing through. I don't have my headphones on. Anyway, so I've got 3 very different shots, and I want to bring these into Premiere Pro. So I'm just going to go over to Premiere Pro. So let's create a new project. And this is in the right spot. And just before I do this, I'm just going to go back into here. So I'm using a pretty consistent file structure here, where I have, my shows where I have all my Maya scenes render is where I have a similar structure or an exact same structure for all my renders. And then comp is where I build my After Effects projects, and Premiere I would put in here too. And then comp master might be where I export shots from those After Effects files. So comp, you can see I've got my After Effects file, I've got Premiere Pro files here. And then comp master, I've got sequence 1, shot 1, shot 2. And so if I have to export from After Effects, this is where I would export them to. So if I just go back here, I've got my show folder where I have sequence 1, shot 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And then my render folder has a similar structure. So sequence 1, shot 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So these are the things where so in here, the show folder is where I have all my Maya files. And then my render folder is where all my Maya renders go to, so I know exactly where to find them. And then my comp folder is where I have all my After Effects files that bring in the renders from that render folder. And then if I have to render out of these After Effects files, those would go into comp master, which shares the same sequence and shot setting. So this is everybody uses different file structure, but you want to keep it consistent so you know where to find everything. And this is, of course, even more important when you're trying to link files using something like Adobe Live Link. It's got to be able to reliably find them. Whoops, wrong space. Okay, so we were in Premiere. So I'm just going to create a new project. So I'll just call this demo linking. And of course I would name it. My project is starting with MSD. So I would just use the same thing here, and it's going into that comp folder. Don't have to change anything else here. You might want to make sure you've got a scratch disk. So for different things here, video previews. Actually, I should shift this one over to a drive with a little more space. That one's running out. Anyway, so this is our Premiere tutorial. So you can figure that stuff out. Okay, so now we've got Premiere open, just an empty project. And here we've got our project, and we can bring our files in different ways. So the first thing we're going to look at is, let me just pop over to PowerPoint. We're going to use the Adobe Dynamic Live Link. Okay, and hopefully this works. Like I said, it's been a little buggy for me, and reading online, it's been buggy for a long time. This fills you with confidence, I'm sure. So we can bring these these compositions in different ways. So in the project palette here, we can right click and go to import. And if we choose something like this one, sequence 2, shot 1, and say open, it will open the import After Effects composition. It's looking through the file, looking for the compositions that are there, connecting to Dynamic Link Server. And I do find that the more complex the After Effects file is, the longer this can take. So you can see that I've got a number of poorly named pre-comps in here. I made sure to name the one correctly, the one that I want to bring in. So I can say OK. Now if I just drag this over to the timeline, it will set up a new sequence with the settings according to this in terms of the ratio and frame rate and so on. And you can see now it's bringing it over. It's actually doing a pretty good job of scrubbing through. If I play, this is actually quite good. When I was doing this before, it was really poor performance, and it would get stuck at a certain point. Now, one thing to note is I'm using Premiere Pro 2021. You also have to have the same version, the same year version of After Effects installed. Otherwise, it won't work. So if you just have After Effects 2020 installed and Premiere Pro 2021, it can't do the live link. You have to have the same. Okay, so that's how I brought this one in. I right-clicked and did import. You could also go into the media browser here. And if I think I have a shortcut to this one, do I? No. Okay, so I'll have to navigate there. And it can be a little bit slow to read the directory here, I've noticed. So if I just scrub through here till I find OneDrive University of Toronto and open this up, it's taking forever. Got a lot of files. So this is MRP3D. This is where it's going to be located. So I'm just going to right click on this and say add to favorites, and that will show up in my favorites list. So it'll be easier to find. But if I navigate into here, let's see if I find it this way. Actually, let me just go into my MRP3D. So now we've got a shortcut up here. If I open up comp, and so if I click on the next one I want to bring in, which is this one, then here it's going to show the separate compositions that we can choose. So I can choose this one, and I can drag this over. Right, so let's see how this plays back. I think there is sound. I just have my headphones on. This is playing back really nicely, actually. And then it plays both. So that's great. That works really well. And then you can do things like add transitions here in Premiere, right? So if we want to do a video transition, like a cross dissolve between these, we'll probably get a warning there aren't enough frames. So we might need to clip off the end so it doesn't have to repeat the frames. Yeah, so there's missing some frames there. So if I just undo that, let's get in a bit closer. I'm no big video editor here, so there are probably better ways to do this. But if I clip this off a little bit, clip this off, move these back, and now if I had the cross dissolve here, it should only appear on one of them. But I think we'll get a proper cross dissolve now. It's very quick. I keep forgetting spacebar doesn't bring in the hand tool. So if I just grab this cross dissolve, I should learn these shortcuts. What's this one? V. Okay. What's the hand? H. Makes sense. Okay, can't stretch that out. Anyway, yeah, it's not a perfect cross dissolve, but anyway, so you can use this to add transitions and things like that in here. So there's another way. So we looked at just going to importing here or using the media browser, but another way you can do this is actually open up After Effects. So let me open up my third project type, and this is just a text animation. You can see I've got only one comp. It's called comp 1. I'm just going to shrink down After Effects a little bit because I can just go back to my project window here in Premiere, go back to After Effects here, and just drag this comp into my project window, and it will make the Adobe Live Link. So that one is called comp 1 title example. And I can add here, so there's no audio here, so it doesn't bring in an audio track. So one thing is, it looks like there's nothing happening here. I just realized a mistake I made. It's black text, which it looks like it's against the black background, or sorry, a gray background, but there's actually no background here at all. So it's just showing up against black. So I'm just going to add a solid layer. Layer, new solid, Control Y. Just make this gray and just put it in the back and save. So now it works, right? Because it just updates because of the live link, and now we can play back. This is working really well for some reason. And so all the buggy things that were happening to me the first time I tried to do this aren't happening. But one thing that I found that was happening is when I had two shots that had a very similar naming structure. So for example, this one was called MSD-Q001 shot 002. This other one had the exact same name, the AEP, the After Effects file, where it was Q001 shot 002. So it was exactly, and Premiere couldn't tell the difference between the two. I think it was treating them like versions of the same shot, and so it wouldn't recognize different compositions. So I would see certain compositions from this one, and the same ones would be selectable here, and it kept telling me the media could not be found. So if you're running into that problem, give them more distinctive names that don't look like version names. So if all this works for you, you can see the playback is really good. And hopefully then you can just use Adobe Live Link, because, if I now see this shot, for example, of this square, if I pop back into After Effects, I'm going to open up that project again. This one. If I select this shape layer and simply change the color of that square and save, and go back into here, you can see it updates immediately. I don't have to do anything to refresh. And it works well. Now, this title sequence too, I could take it and put it on top of this, but now that solid I put in the background is a problem, right? So if I go back into After Effects again and open up that recent project, the title example, and I can just hide that gray solid. So there's just nothing in the background there. That's just the composition background, so it's actually transparent. I save this now, go back into here. Now that is sitting on top, right? So this is a good way to integrate titles that you make in After Effects on top of your video clips or your Adobe Live Links in Premiere Pro. So if I play this now. So it's a pretty good workflow. Now this is just with 3 shots and it's working pretty well. You should be able to do multiple shots, loads of shots, and put them together this way. You can see it's slowing down a little bit when I've got multiple things going on, but it's still fast enough that I can easily see what I'm doing. Okay. Remember how I said short tutorial? Sorry. The other way you could do this is to go back into After Effects. If you don't want to use Adobe Live Link, then you can just export your videos, right? So let me open up one that's a little simpler to export than the complex 3D rendered one. So if I have something like this and I want to not live link but actually export video clip to bring into Premiere Pro, you can just export like you normally do. So you can just go to File, Export, and you can add to Render Queue or you can add to Adobe Media Encoder. The one thing to consider is that you don't want to compress your files at this point because you're building your master file and you don't want to introduce compression now. You want to have a clean, uncompressed source file in Premiere that you can export a final uncompressed version that you can later use to generate compressed versions. So this is a rule throughout the whole process. It's like you don't really want to use JPEGs for your textures in Maya because they're compressed, right? So you want to use EXRs or .tx files if you're using Arnold and stuff like that. So this can be a bit of a problem though, because when you keep exporting these uncompressed versions of your file, your video clips, that can be huge, right? Like tens of gigabytes, depending on what the file is like. So a couple of ways to approach this. So you could make a working Premiere Pro project where you actually export compressed versions of your shots, and then just use that to, you know, build up your whole thing, and then later on go back to After Effects and export uncompressed versions and replace the footage in Premiere. So that's requires an extra step and more organization. So you're going to have a folder for exported low resolution clips, or sorry, not low resolution, but compressed clips. And then later on, you have to swap in uncompressed clips. So what's a compressed clip? So if you're using H.264 or something, so if I add this to the render queue and I choose on the output module here, I'm on Windows here, but if I chose QuickTime, format options, okay, I'm not really sure how to do this. Okay, let me try one where it's more obvious. Okay, let me cancel this and go to File, Export, Adobe Media Encoder. So it's going to take a second for this to load, so I'll just pause. Okay, so Adobe Media Encoder has opened, and it has brought my file in here, and you can choose default here. So this would export an MP4 using H.264. So this is a compressed version, but it'll be much smaller in terms of memory and storage space. It'll play back faster. You can use any of these presets. So like you might want to choose Vimeo 1080p Full HD. If I switch this, still using H.264, and you know, generate an MP4, but this is a compressed file type, right? So this is not what you want for the final, but if you want to export samples of your shots to construct in Premiere, then this is great, but know that you have to later on replace them with uncompressed versions. So if we go back into After Effects and go to File, Export, Render Queue. Now you can do this in the Media Encoder too, but if we go to the Render Queue here, so I've got two, let me just delete this first one. If I go to Lossless, so you can use AVI. I don't really know anything about the AVI format options, to be honest. Even though I'm working on a PC, I'm much more familiar with the QuickTime options. And so the uncompressed formats you can use, the really uncompressed one is animation quality set to 100. And that will give you just like a pixel for pixel export. It can be a huge file though, even for relatively short scenes. So you can do this and it'll be super clean. And this is what we often would do in the past, but now I've been using Apple ProRes 4444. Somebody might tell me this is not the best way to do it, but this is a compressed version, but sort of lightly compressed. It's a really high quality compressed version. So you could use this to export a video clip to bring into Premiere Pro. But the really uncompressed one is animation set to 100. So let me just export this. Do I have sound in this one? Yes, I do actually. Audio output, yep. Video output, okay. And then that's where it's going to be named. Let's make sure it goes to the right spot. Computer's slowing down right now. I'm afraid I'm going to crash. But it's in comp. I would export this to comp master, and this is, you know, sequence 1, shot 2. So I would save it here, and I would name it this, and I could call this uncomp or something, just to make it uncompressed, just to make it very clear. And then render. This should take very little time because it's such a short animation. Okay, so now if I go into Premiere Pro, I could import this. And you could do it through the media browser and so on, Comp Master, but I can just do it this way as well. But I know where to find it because it's all organized. And you can see it's got a different icon. This is actually an imported clip. It's still linked, so if I re-exported and replaced it, it would replace it immediately in my timeline here, but I would have to re-export it. And so if we play the animation now, or the whole sequence, yeah, so you can see it's a little janky, and then that's the live link, and then that's the exported one. They look just the same. Anyway, so my short half-an-hour video should at least give you an idea about how to start, but be aware, live linking I think is a great way to do this, and if it works, I think it's the best way for bringing in title sequences that you can put over top of your footage or other shots. But for linking your After Effects, you don't have to worry about exporting, you don't have to worry about compressing and all that kind of stuff. But be aware that it could be a problem. And if your particular shot is problematic through Adobe Live Link, then just export uncompressed from After Effects and bring that into Premiere. And then you can assemble your video here. And you could still work on adjusting the audio here. You could get rid of the audio here and restructure the audio here in Premiere, because you could just be using the audio in After Effects to make sure the timing of everything is correct. But you get a lot of flexibility, and you can see that the feedback is really quite quick in Premiere Pro. Anyway, I hope you find this helpful, and this gives you next steps when you want to assemble your final animation. Thanks.